All this is Dr. Mobeen Sayed from drbeen.com. Welcome to one more show. My apologies, I am a little late. So, today we are going to go over a study that has some interesting data points in it and some interesting clues. And I'm going to look at this study impartially. The study says that data analysis during the trials may not have been done as accurately, and I want to look at that with you. Plus, I also want to make sure that we can understand the counter argument as well. So, this particular discussion that I'm going to do is not an anti vaccine discussion. Neither is this a pro vaccine discussion, but it is more of a data analysis and decision making, and how the right way, or at least better way than where we were before, can be taken based on the data. So let's look at this study. Um, I thought a lot about it before doing it. That would this be considered as a study that is against the vaccines? And I don't think it is a study against the vaccine. Neither is this a pro vaccine study. It is just a set of researchers who are looking at that data and saying, hey, this is another way to look at it. So the study is serious adverse events of special interest following mRNA COVID-19 vaccinations in randomized trial in adults. And what they did was, these researchers, that they looked at the data that was already submitted to FDA, and then they looked at that data once more from the adverse events list that was backed by WHO, to say, here are the adverse events that we should keep an eye on, and have the vaccine in that light as well. So I'm going to show that in a second. However, I also want to make sure that we can look at the authors, because one of the authors here, Peter Doshi, has gotten this repute nowadays as vaccine uh, so he's not entirely on board with the vaccine's current status or current methods or usage. So that would put some people at this odds to say, well, if it is Peter Doshi, maybe he is already against the vaccine. He's not against the vaccines. This, I want to see the data. And then here is Joseph from Health Thibodeaux. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Then Unit of Innovation and Organization, Spain. Then Institute of Evidence-Based Healthcare, Bond University, Australia. Fielding School of Public Health and College of Letters and Sciences, University of California, Los Angeles. Geffen School of Medicine, University of California, Los Angeles. Clinical Excellence Research Center, School of Medicine, Stanford. And then Peter Doshi, School of Pharmacy, University of Maryland, Baltimore. What is the interesting part in it? Let's look at that first. What they did was, they said, the researchers, they said there is a list of severe adverse events that was created by Brighton collaboration here. And this events list was actually made before the vaccines came in, to say that if vaccines come in, here is a list of severe effects that we are seeing with COVID. And when the vaccines are out there, we should be aware of these side effects especially. Plus, they had looked at previous vaccines to say, when we administer vaccines, here are the kind of side effects we have seen in the past vaccines, non-COVID vaccines. So we should look at them as well and make sure that these effects are not occurring. So they had a number of inputs into creating a list. And I think that they actually did a good job of creating the list. And once they created that list, so if you see here, as part of its work to harmonize safety assessment of CEPI funded vaccines, the Safety Platform for Emergency Vaccine SPEAK project has generated a list of adverse events of special interest for safety monitoring based on one or more of the following criteria. And then they have a criteria here. Then they said, as the global experience with the SARS-CoV-2 infection expanded, a first update to the list was done in May 2020. Then they had another update later at May 27 to 28, 2020. Then there was a another in September 2020. Then the third update was completed in December 2020. There's a fourth update in August 2021. And based on various inputs, they then have created a list. And I actually find this interesting. I wish I had seen this before. It's so interesting. I did not see it before. So if you see here, their objectives was part one of the fourth update focused on long COVID. They wanted to figure out if the long COVID can be added this or not. Now, if I go here to some of their list of adverse events, these are in their annexes. So here, for example, updated August 2021 COVID-19 AESI, including status of associated Brighton case definitions. So here they're saying acute respiratory distress syndrome, myocarditis, pericarditis, other forms of cardiac injury, coagulation disorders, thrombotic disorders, bleeding disorders, anosmia, ageusia, chilblains like lesions, and so on. Excuse me. So they created this list. The authors here, they said that what we did was we went through the briefing documents presented by Moderna and Pfizer during their approval, the FDA briefing of their phase 3 trial work that they had. Authors said that we went over their side effects list, matched it to the Brighton's list, and figured out what are the severe side effects or adverse side effects of interest, special interest, and then we counted them with the population and reanalyzed the data. They also say that in the FDA briefing, and we know it, we've been talking about those briefings when these were done, that FDA said in both cases, Moderna or Pfizer, that there doesn't seem to be any imbalance, or this seemed to be a balance and between placebo and the vaccine, so we're all good. So now let's look at the reanalysis and then look at some points of reanalysis where you could challenge the authors and say, maybe your analysis isn't really correct and their analysis, FDA's analysis, isn't really incorrect. So I want to have that balance, and that balancing statement is coming from this study as well. So it is not that the authors are leaning somewhere else and I am providing a balance. These statements are there as well. So let's look at them. First, I say that in 2020, prior to COVID-19 vaccine rollout, prior to rollout of the vaccines, the Brighton collaboration created a priority list endorsed by the World Health Organization of potential adverse events relevant to COVID-19 vaccines. So now what they did was, what did these authors do? They said, we did a secondary analysis of serious adverse events reported in the placebo-controlled phase 3 randomized clinical trials of Pfizer and Moderna. Focusing analysis on Brighton collaboration adverse events. So they took their data and they mapped that to the Brighton's list. Result. This is interesting. Pfizer and Moderna mRNA COVID-19 vaccines were associated. This is the trial result. Were associated with an excess risk of serious adverse events of special interest of 10.1 and 15.1 per 10,000 vaccinated over placebo baseline. So I'm going to read the baseline in a second. So what they're saying is, let's say Pfizer first. Pfizer's placebo group had 17.6 adverse effects per 10,000 participants, while the vaccine group had an additional 10.1, so that would be 18.7 per 10,000. Similarly, Moderna, the placebo showed 42.2 per 10,000, while the vaccine showed an additional 15.1 per 10,000. Now, why is this interesting? You can say, yeah, sure, okay, 15 more here. This is interesting because the percentages are actually way off now. And secondly, it was said that there is a balance. Placebo and the vaccine were similar. So, how much is the imbalance with this reanalysis? Here is what they're saying. Combined, the mRNA vaccines were associated with an excess risk of serious adverse events of special interest of 12.5 per 10,000 vaccinated. So, now, of course, you could say, why is this reanalysis showing a different result? Why did FDA not see that? So we will actually talk about that. That is the clarity that I want to put in front of us. So the first takeaway is that the combined mRNA vaccines were associated with an excess risk of serious adverse events of special interest of 12.5 per 10,000 vaccinated, risk ratio of 1.43 times. So that's the risk ratio. The Pfizer trial The Pfizer trial exhibited a 36% higher risk of serious adverse events in the vaccine group. So consider this, that these are not just side effects, these are serious adverse events according to this list that was formed before the vaccines were actually rolled out. And you can look at this list, it doesn't look wrong to me. For example, if somebody says, you know what, you should not look at this list. Who said this list is important? Look at it for yourself. Myocarditis, pericarditis, what do you think? Should that be important or not, considering the latest observations and new studies that we see? I think it is important. Similarly, coagulation disorders, do you think it should be on the list? Yes. And they had that in the list as well. The data that these authors used was from the trials. The only thing is, in the trial brief document they said no problem, but when you map them on this list and count those lists again, there is a difference. The difference is this: 36% higher risk of serious adverse events in the vaccine group, risk difference 18 per 10,000 vaccinated, risk ratio 1.36. That's a 36% with it. The Moderna trial, so this was Pfizer, 36% different. The Moderna trial exhibited a 6% higher risk. So that is 1.06 risk ratio, which I think is not that big of a change from what was reported in Moderna's trial. And the authors actually say the same as well. They say that our analysis of Moderna did not show a very different outcome as FDA said that they are seeing. It's the Pfizer where they saw more. But on the hospitalization, we're going to look at that as well in a second. Moderna trial exhibited a 6% high risk of the serious adverse events in the vaccine group. Risk difference 7.1 per 10,000, risk ratio 1.06. Combined, Moderna and Pfizer, there was a 16% higher risk of serious adverse events in the mRNA vaccine receipt. Risk difference 13.2. However, please note here, the 95% confidence is crossing the unity or null. So this would not be null hypothesis. So this would not be valid. Okay, so with this, the question is, I see Keeney's comment. Thank you, Keeney. So the question is, how did they find the difference? Let me, I did some note taking. So I'm going to go back here. These are the gifts for humanity, and they're continuing. Here are some important things that authors did, and we should keep in mind. Number one, they said, and I'll read it to you. This is in the section 4 of their document, manuscript. They said, check this out. I think, and I need your commentary on this one. Check this out. They said, FDA analysis included the incidence of participants. Okay, so I really need your input. You are for vaccines, or you are against vaccines, or you are hesitant, or you are contemplative about it. Whatever is your opinion, tell me this. If I have a vaccine and I develop two serious effects, for example, let's say I develop a cardiac problem and I develop clotting, would you call them two effects or one effect? What do you think? And that this counting, there are going to be people who are going to say, we'll just consider it one. It is one person, as many serious effects as one event, one incidence. There are going to be some people who would say, no, this is two. There is clotting and cardiac problem. The vaccine is demonstrating two problems. So now, with this, keep this in mind. Let's go back to how FDA counted and how this study counted. FDA said, whatever are the number of events in one person, will count that as one person, because they were not counting events, they were counting participants with events, participants who had events, right? So if Mubin had two events, from FDA's calculation, they're not counting the events, they're counting people. So one people had this. On the other hand, this study, they said, we did not count people. Instead, we counted total number of events, even if there were more than one events in one person. So that means one can form an opinion and say, no, I am with FDA, it is one person. Or, hey, we are with the study researchers' way of looking at it, that every adverse event should be counted as one incidence of the event. And that would change the math. And that exactly did change the math. So if you have, let's say, 20 people with 30 events in them, FDA would say 20 people had events. The researchers would say 30 events occurred. That is one difference. And they mention it. It's not Mubin coming back with some journalistic investigation. They mention it. Second thing, this is even more interesting. And I see some super chats, so thank you very much. Who are the super chatters? Andrea, always working hard for humanity. Thank you. And Dr. Stu, great information, dog. Thank you. So the second thing that's also very interesting is this. They say that for non-fatal severe side effects, meaning other than dying, FDA used a larger population. I actually cracked up when I saw the difference. So it's sometimes, there can be something right in front of you and you are not noticing it. But when somebody points out something about it, then you start noticing it. If I say, notice a blue car, then you'll start looking at blue cars everywhere. What FDA did was, they said, we are going to count adverse event. The population is going to be, so remember the dosage scheme was something like this, that you give dose 1 here, then let's say 3 weeks or 4 weeks later you give dose 2, and then you say 15 days later you have fully vaccinated, correct? Now what FDA did was, they said, let's say there were 20 people with adverse events. We know now that most of the adverse events occur after the second dose. We know now, and mostly in men. Let's say we give a blank check to FDA and say they did not know this. Then, when the knowledge appeared on the horizon that it happens after the second dose, then there needed to be an adjustment. So, once again, it's you, whoever, whatever way you believe, it is your opinion to be formed in your head to assess this. What FDA did was they said, we will count the total population, the denominator, from the dose one, from the dose one. Now, look at the math with me for a second. Imagine after the dose two, there were 100 people in dose two. And because incidence is more after the dose two, imagine after those 110 people had it. It's high, but let's use that as an example. So 10% of dose two have a problem. However, let's say there were 500 in dose one who were given the dose one, they are yet waiting for dose two. And their follow up time is really what? 2 week, 1 week, 3 weeks. Not sufficient because then they're going to get dose two yet. Correct? So I come to you and I say, you know what? Yes, we have 20 people, but the total participants are not 100. The total participants are actually 600. So it should be 20 divided by 600. So 20 divided by 100 or 20 divided by 600 is very different. Or I think I use the 10, whichever. 10 divided by 100 or 10 divided by 600 is a different number. How did that become different in the same study analysis? It depends what group did you use. So FDA used the group with starting from the dose one. So let me quickly just take this one out. So again, author said FDA for non-fatal SEA or severe adverse events SAE, FDA used a larger population, because they included participants of first dose minus the folks who had HIV. So then what was the FDA's result? FDA said there were 126 people with 21 out of 21,621, that is 0.6% adverse event in vaccine. In placebo, there were 111 events, not events, people out of 21,636, and that is 0.5. And they look at this and say, look, 0.5 and 0.6 is almost the same. No issues. Balance. On the other hand, the researcher said, we didn't do this. We took that part of the population that was post dose 2. And not only that, they said we also included that participants as well that were beyond 1 month. What does that mean? FDA was looking at all dose 1, dose 2, and a month after. So if somebody had an adverse event month and a half after, then that they would not be counted. Plus the dose 1, and there are less side effects anyways after dose 1. So that population, larger population, provided a better percentage. Here, in the case of researchers, they said we actually jotted it down to 18,801. These were those folks who were post dose 2 plus 2 months onwards. Vaccine was 127, which is 0.67, almost 0.7, right? And placebo was 93 out of this, which is 0.49, which is 0.5. So now you have a interesting gap. You can't call it balanced. And once again, you could form an opinion to say, I want to do math this way. This way seems right. So let me ask you, which way seems right to you? You could say that, you know what, I agree with FDA. It is just all population and then the people. Or you could say, I agree with the researchers. it should be after the dose 2 when there are more side effects. My thinking is, so let me first see what you would say and then I'll provide you my thinking. I'm looking at your comments. Okay, so my thinking is this. At the time of vaccine trials, the data that was shown, which is reprocessed here, reanalyzed here, that data was shown in a way that it is balanced, one. Secondly, I don't think they knew that there will be more adverse events after the second dose and in men, because mRNA vaccines were not used like this before. So you could say that fine, FDA did not know it, so they used the whole population. Although you can challenge FDA to say, FDA, this is your job. You work with the vaccines and drugs, and you have a knowledge and depth of understanding of how to look at these kind of things. And you should have looked at a little bigger horizon. But that's just a criticism of FDA. Now, at least, we know, all of us know, including FDA, that second dose and after in men, messenger RNA under 29 or years of age has more cardiovascular and thrombotic effects. We know it. This is not a conspiracy theory. Just like FDA looked at Johnson and Johnson and said it is causing too many side effects. Unfortunately, even for my wife, Johnson and Johnson caused side effect, and they said we are taking it off, or really didn't push it any further. They could look at this data again as well and say, oh, so this looks like we should reprocess the data from this point of view, that the second dose and after is the major problem, especially in men, especially in this age. And let's do the harm benefit analysis once more. There was nothing bad in doing that. But of course, it needed some manager to say to some team member to say, can you redo this analysis? And that was a difficult thing to do. So back here, the author said, we took the population with median follow-up more than 2 months, equal or more than 2 months after dose 2 minus the HIV positive patients. And that gave a different result as well. Then, this is something that I had been talking about as well. And I still remember, I actually remember like a daylight, that when there was a discussion, remember Johnson and Johnson discussion by the FDA briefing? By that time, the cardiovascular events and thrombosis rumors had started. The studies were coming out of UK and then they were coming out of Germany. And I remember I looked at those studies and I got people yelling at me that why did you talk about them? You're against the vaccines and so on. And there was a news in CNN where the representative, whoever it was, FDA or CDC, they said, we are not going to, for I believe it was for Johnson and Johnson, we are not going to restrict it to some people and not others because it will become too complex to communicate. And I remember, plus they said, we will send a communication for if this happens, the cardiovascular effects, what should be done. And I said at that time, I remember that they would never do it. To me, it seemed like just covering your behind by simply saying, you know what, we'll work on it. And then they go away and then nobody asks them. So the authors here said that as well. They said FDA had promised to provide an update once they found more data from production And they said, excuse me, they said no update from the studies from production except four new events of interest that FDA said we should add to the events of interest list. Nothing else, no other update, no other information. So they actually wrote that to the writing of this paper, FDA has not followed up on the promise of updating us. But I would give you this thought. Remember, a few days ago, we looked at a freedom of information uh, email where someone had reached out to FDA and CDC to say, "Have you been doing your PRR the weekly review?" And they simply said, "We have never done it, and we don't have any data, and the analysis of this kind is FDA's duty, and you should go and ask them." Remember? So 2 years they didn't do any weekly review. You think that they would look at studies and then go back and say, "We need to redo the trial data analysis"? I don't think they would do it. So this is another, I think, fair critique on FDA to say, FDA, you promised to pick up data from production and then come back with that data digested and said, all good, or no, we have some hesitations. They did that for Johnson and Johnson. Somehow they didn't do it for Pfizer and Moderna. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. Then some interesting things here. Another thing that was very interesting here that they brought up, the authors, and I am actually very much interested in your opinion. Why? Because this video will be watched by some folks who are staunchly vaccine, all good, no issues, and there are going to be some who would look at it to say vaccine's always bad. Then there are going to be some who are going to say, well, I have more concerns here and here. So I want to hear what your comment is. This is one more interesting piece of information that authors have here, and that is the promise was that Pfizer or Moderna will continue to follow up with the trial cohort for 2 years. But, and I think again, we could come back and we could say they did the right thing. But the authors say there are two things that happened. Number one, soon after the trials, they started unblinding the placebo group. I think that it would have been okay because if vaccine was going to protect them, then sure. But once you unblind someone, then you can't follow them for 2 years because now there is going to be subjectivity and there's going to be bias in there. Second thing is that those who were unblinded, they were also offered, or those who were unvaccinated, they were also offered an opportunity to be vaccinated, which I think is fine as well because vaccines were supposed to be the big lifesavers, and it would have been not fair for a placebo group to unknowingly stay that way for 2 years. However, because they were vaccinated and unblinded, we cannot really use their data for now 2 years. What would we say? This was a placebo, and I see them for 2 years, and now they have a side effect. Well, they have become vaccinated or unblinded. So there's a bias in there. So that promise of 2 years follow up can only be now for vaccinated individuals, but cannot be compared to someone else. So this is another information that they bring up, that this makes it the analysis even more difficult. So then what is the solution? And they have a good point. They say, the authors, we should look at the studies that are coming out now. And in the light of those studies, reanalyze, re-review, or review the work and figure out what is the right thing. I think if people don't start sending fires that, hey, this is anti-vaccine or pro-vaccine, and in fact, if you take these authors' work and if you take the FDA's or the company's work, Moderna and Pfizer, you put that work together, you will find some truth that would be in the middle of both. And that is how at least Western societies had claimed to reach the truth, by having this little disputational dialogue. I don't see any problem with these authors' work here. And they actually, I'll go to the limitations in a second. They actually say in their limitations that we did this work only on top of the publicly available data. We don't have patient level data to actually make a more precise analysis. And they said we encourage that whoever has that data, that means the companies and FDAs and CDCs, whoever has the data, to do this analysis on their own because they have the data. And I think they're right in that. The question will be, for example, if you go to FDA and say, please redo your data analysis, the question will be, are you guys conspiracy theorists? And you just, now we have to, every time you come to our door, we have to go back and reanalyze. I think the process done here is useful indicator or a guideline for FDA to use. I don't see a huge conspiracy in here. Okay, so what were the four things? So here, if you see, the definition of a serious adverse event was provided in each trial study protocol and included in the supplement material of trials publication. Pfizer and Moderna used a nearly identical definition consistent with regulatory expectation, and SAE was defined as an adverse event that results in any of the following conditions: death, life threatening at the time of the event, inpatient hospitalization, prolongation of existing hospitalization, persistent or significant disability, incapacity, a congenital anomaly, birth defect, medically important event, and based on medical judgment. So, continuing, I have just a couple of more things to share with you. This part. So, I've already done this 36% and 6% analysis. I want to read this part now. Harm benefit consideration. In the Moderna trial, the excess risk of serious adverse events of special interest, 15.1 per 10,000 participants, was higher than the risk reduction for COVID-19 hospitalization relative to the placebo group. And that was 6.4 per 10,000. What are they saying? Compared to placebo, vaccinated individuals from trial had more serious side effects compared to placebo folks going to hospital. Meaning number of hospitalizations were less from COVID, but number of adverse events were more from vaccine. So you could then respond here and say, no, not fair, not a good comparison. Here is why. And actually, it came to my head as well. Although I still agree with the author's approach. The objection can be COVID hospitalization is a very different intensity of COVID and not comparable, for example, let's say let's pick up something from here. Anosmia or ageusia or chilblains or erythema multiforme. However, it is, I would say, comparable to coagulation disorder or cardiomyopathy or acute pancreatitis, which can also do a lot of harm and so on. Meaning, one could say that not every event can be compared to hospitalization event from COVID. And that, I think, will be a fair analysis, fair judgment. And once again, people will have to form their opinion. Some people, some doctors, some not doctors, they would say, for me, If Mobeen had the heart attack from the vaccine, that is equal to going to hospital or more. And some would say, no, if there was a thrombotic event and that just happened to Mubin and that was just, he never had to go to hospital. He had chest pains for 2 days and it was okay. Compared to someone who's on a ventilator, they are very different outcomes. So, no, they're not comparable. And that discussion will be valid. But the beauty is that this discussion, the discussion that I'm doing in front of you from both groups, this discussion, this decent discussion should occur. But till so far, what I see is firefights. People take something and go out and they beat others with it, and then others come back with some other study and they beat the other group with it, and it's just continuous. We're not reaching the truth with that. Now, the second part, in the Pfizer trial, the excess risk of serious adverse events of special interest, 10.1 per 10,000, was higher than the risk reduction of COVID-19 hospitalization relative to placebo group, and that was 2.3 per 10,000. So I think this is also a very interesting way. This is an interesting take. If I was going to use this stat, imagine if you and I are running FDA together, and we are talking with our team and we are saying, you know what, we need to look at the hospitalization and the adverse events and compare them. I would have asked them, we would have asked them to look at this one and remove things like anosmia or mm, less things can be removed actually that much, but you know what I'm saying. You remove those that are not equal to hospitalization with COVID, and then use the rest of the list and do the reanalysis. And that would have been really, really cool to do. I think it would just be a curiosity. So these are various uh, annexes with data, arrhythmias, cardiac injury, and so on. So back here. So this is another interesting point that they've made. This is that comparison of the review. This is their section 4, the FDA review and others. I know that somebody is going to pick up my talk and say, you were just making up things here. Even for yesterday, my talk in which I actually linked the researcher's interview to back up what I was saying. And even then, somebody put a comment that you are showing the weakness of your understanding. And I said, I actually linked the researcher and their interview for what I'm saying. So somebody is going to just look at all of this and hear one sentence at minute 20 and then go running that you're wrong. All of this discussion here is present here in the section 4 of the manuscript. These things that I've highlighted are the ones that I had written down. Okay, so what other things did they see? This is it. So we are basically done, but I want to just show you some more tables that they've used. For example, let's see coagulation disorders here. Coagulation disorders, 16 with the vaccine, 10 in the placebo. Vaccine events per 10,000, 8.5. Placebo events per 10,000, 5.3. Difference in events, where am I? 3.2. Risk ratio, 1.6. This is a reprocessed data. And they say that we took their data and reprocessed in the light of this list. Imagine if these researchers have more data access, just like those Pfizer documents that are coming in now. How much more information will be available for the betterment of all of us? The more information and data is available, the more we know goods and bads, the better harm benefit analysis. So you can actually look at these if you like. But if you see here on the risk ratio, the 2 or 1.6 or 2, these are the newly processed risk ratios that are way above what they were saying. Keep in mind that they said everything is balanced and fine. Then this is some more data in similar ways. I want to now show you the, so see, now they're saying rational policy formation should consider potential harms alongside potential benefits. Now, limitations. What were the challenges? First, benefit and harms are rarely exact equivalents, and there can be great variability in those. And I'm not going to read this whole thing, I'm just some ideas. Second, just to put in front of you that they know where the limitations of their own work are. Second, individual value different endpoints differently. Because you're asking someone that, hey, did you have a severe side effect? Everyone will value their event in a different way. Third, without individual participant data, we could only compare the number of individuals hospitalized for COVID 19 against the number of serious AESI, not the number of participants experiencing any serious AESI. So they didn't have the individual data. So that's a problem. Then, Pfizer's trial did not report SAEs occurring past 1 month after dose 2. So Pfizer's data actually was no data after 1 month. So how could you now look at any issue after 2 months or 3 months or 6 months? You can't, because their data is only up till 1 month. And they say this reporting threshold may have led to an undercounting of serious AESI. Second, for both studies, the limited follow up time prevented an analysis of harm benefit over a longer period of time. And I remember people kept saying, hey, in the long term, what would happen? We should keep an eye on that. Third, all SAEs in our analysis met the regulatory definition of a serious adverse event, but many adverse events types with the patient may themselves judge as serious may not meet this regulatory threshold. Fourth, decision about which SAEs to include or exclude as AESIs require subjective clinical judgment. So then here they go hands up and say, we encourage third party replication of our study with access to complete SAE case narrative to determine the degree to which these decisions affect our findings. So they went hands up and they said, sure, we don't have all the data. So if you have the data, we would request you to look at it in this light. Maybe you'll come back with a different finding. Fifth important limitation is a lack of access to individual participant data, which forced us to use a conservative adjustment to the standard errors. So they had to make some adjustments to data. Finally, as described above, in the Moderna analysis, the SAEs that were sequelae of serious COVID 19 could not be identified. So there's another technical thing. These study limitations all stem from the fact that the raw data from COVID 19 vaccine clinical trial are not publicly available. We emphasize that our investigation is preliminary to point to the need for more involved analysis. Guess who can do that more involved analysis? Can you and I do it? We can't. We just don't have data. So this would have been really cool if our healthcare authorities were continuously curating all the new data that is emerging, looking at studies and saying, this study looks solid, this study does not look solid, this study looks good, this does not look good. I'm going to pick up the good studies. They are negative or positive, doesn't matter. We are going to reanalyze, we'll keep updating, we'll have a score for vaccine, good and bad, and we'll keep providing that score to everyone. The world would have been different. But anyways, that is a discussion. um, let's see. Nipa says, could you do a comparison about the side effects of mRNA vaccine versus DNA AstraZeneca? Yes, so they did not do this. I think we could pick up similar data and do a similar work, but imagine the amount of analysis needed. Sunset says, what do you think about BA46? I have to look into that. So I will look into it and I'll discuss it. And happy Labor Day to everyone as well. I believe this is a long weekend. So thank you very much for spending your Friday evening with me. So me says, when is the next walk? Tomorrow morning, 7 p.m., 7 a.m. Pacific time, we'll do our walk. Susan says, what is the timeline for these adverse events to occur? So both companies reported differently. Pfizer had given data up to 1 month after the second dose or 1 month after the dose. I think Moderna had a little larger data point. Michelle, thank you very much. I see one more super chat as well from Me Be Gone. Thank you very much. And I think this is it for today. Please do me a. John is asking me the most difficult thing. How can we fix the FDA? I don't think we can. And I have a reason for saying that. It's a bold statement. I'll give you an example of how bad the things are. There is a person who is vaccine injured, and that person has a family member who is a doctor who works in FDA. And if somebody wants to verify this story, you can talk with me separately. But again, you have to have a credential and a reason to understand the verification. But I can have you connect with them. This person who is vaccine injured said that I'm vaccine injured. The doctor who works in FDA told this family member, they are actually a sibling of them, and said, stop saying that. This person said, I won't stop saying it because I have all the tests and I have this issue and that issue. To the point that that sibling have stopped visiting and meeting this family member who is injured. I thought it would have been that, hey, I am in the FDA. Tell me what's going on. One, I may be able to help you. Secondly, I may be able to connect you. We should probably figure out what's going on. So, John, if there are situations like this, I have no hope from our healthcare authorities. They have done what they've done. Fortunately, we are near the end of pandemic. Fingers crossed. Some of you would say, no, we're not. And the deaths are plummeting, the hospitalizations, the ICUs. So fortunately, we are on the way out. We still are incurring damage. I hope we shouldn't. But this is a huge opportunity for the whole society and healthcare system to learn from it. They will never have a bigger, I wish we don't have another pandemic. They would never have a bigger event to learn from. So, anyways, this is where we are. Thank you very much. And I also wanted to today, I had a business discussion with someone to partner in some content generation. And the conditions they put on me to say, you would not do this, you would do this, you would do this. When I was reading those conditions to partner, I was thinking of the cool beans for how you have kept me free from such influences and such partnerships. And I didn't have to go to doing such things and then be controlled. So thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for your journey with me. And please stay safe, happy, and healthy. Uh, that is the smallest fee you can give me, is like, or if you like more, you can subscribe and share as well. And even if you more, there are links in the description. You can buy Dr. Bean's plan for a very reasonable plan. The link is in the description. It's a one-time fee. or you can buy me a coffee, you can use PayPal, you can become a member of Dr. Bean YouTube channel or Substack, locals. There are many ways. So thank you very much and have a great long weekend. And I love you as well. I see a lot of messages about, um, so love you back as well. And I would see you on Monday or Tuesday. Monday or Tuesday, because if I wanted to have a long weekend, then I'll skip Monday. But I'm going to see what are the events that happen. Thank you and bye for now.